Welcome back to the Means of Grace podcast, where faith meets real life and context meets connection. I'm Jesse Enniss, and today we're diving into a topic that's both critical and inspiring. It's the role of youth in the life of the church. Now, we all know that the church is often described as a body, a community of believers of all ages. But what happens when part of that body, namely our youth, what happens when that part is absent? Today, we'll talk about why the absence of young voices has contributed to the decline in church participation. We'll explore the current realities of youth engagement in church. And most importantly, we'll celebrate the ways young people are resurrecting faith in joyful and powerful ways. So whether you're a youth leader, a parent, or simply someone who cares about the future of the church, this episode is definitely for you. So let's dive in. I'm flanked by my much older co-hosts, Reverend John Yeager and Dr. Jonathan LeMaster-Smith. How are you guys doing today?
Oh, it's a good day.
Yeah, I'm doing well.
All right. It's always great when older folks say that they're doing well. Our special guest today is Reverend Shannon LeMaster-Smith, Youth and Children's Ministry Strategist for the Western North Carolina Conference. How are you today?
Great. I'm actually older than all of you, so.
And yet clearly the youngest spirit.
Exactly.
Oh, goodness. Thanks, Jesse. So I want to set the table just a little bit so that Shannon can give us all of the good information. I'm going to tell us a little bit of the past, and Shannon's going to give us the bright future. And I'm really excited about that. Now, usually I'd start at the beginning, something like Adam and Eve having children and the chaos that brought. Maybe you've heard that story, Cain and Abel. Right? There's a little bit of one of the first stories that we have is a problem with children. Not that children are a problem, just that problem of that communication, figuring that out. But I'm not going to start there. I'm going to go all the way to the 20th century. All right. Something pivotal happened. And it wasn't that long ago. Young people in the 50s and 60s started leaving home in larger and larger numbers. There was a post-war boom, the GI Bill. There was a romanticism about now leaving home and setting up your own roots, right? And that was beautiful, and people were inspired by it. But when you leave home, right, and you set up new roots, it sometimes is hard to get into a church. It's sometimes hard to find a new community, right, that will love you and be a part of you the same way that maybe your home church was when you were growing up. And those numbers, they just keep getting higher and higher. And now it's about 50% in the year 2000 were leaving home and setting up their own roots, not living in the communities that they were born into, not attending the churches that they were born into. Now, that's not necessarily a problem if you recognize it. And it's not all bad news. In fact, some churches are thriving, not despite these changes, but because of them. Some churches have embraced this new way, this kind of more overall inclusive church of going, you know what, we need to be more welcoming and inviting. And those places are flourishing. And the churches that understand and really focus in on some of the issues that young people care about, right? Crippling student debt, sometimes in their future, challenges of balancing work and family, longing for purpose and belonging. It's no longer enough to be the church on the corner. You have to actually go out and get them. So yes, the statistics tend to show that fewer young people are showing up at church on Sunday mornings. But do not mistake that for a loss of their desire for connection, for community, and for meaning. The churches that get that and are willing to adapt and innovate are still building the future of our faith right now. The story of the church in the 21st centuries isn't going to be one of decline. It'll be one of transformation. Young people are moving, changing, questioning, but they're also seeking. Let's seek with them instead of telling them. So my question, will the church be there when they come looking for that meaning? We're all beneficiaries in one way or another and victims of the success of our previous generations. When I was growing up, as many of you were, church was booming. Right? I mean, you talk to clergy from 40 years ago and they'll say, yeah, you put out a sign that says fish fry and young people and youth event. Woo, you better have enough fish. I mean, they're going to come. I mean, they're going to come by the dozens. It's just harder now. It's more complicated now. And those are the transitions that I think some of the healthiest churches are making. So today's young people are faced with more than they have ever been faced with. Social media will tell you everything that's going on everywhere all at once. They have more questions and fewer ready-made answers. When the church fails to speak to their experiences, they start to tune out. But here's the thing. Youth have always played a pivotal role in our faith. You could think of David, called by God. The Bible's full of stories where God calls young people to be leaders, prophets, and even saviors. So Jesse wanted to do a segment, and I hope that we do in the coming episodes, called Epic Fails. It's a time where we admit some of the times where, you know what, I took a good swing there, but woo, I looked ugly doing it, and I missed it completely. Let's consider this a team effort here and what's been going on in our churches and with our young people, okay? And let's have a team effort to tackle it. Jesse?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having those segments of epic fails. I think, we do learn so much more from the ways that we fall short than from the things that we have success in. And, social media is already doing such a really good job of sharing all of our successes. But I think what people can really be edified by and what people can really, really grow in is learning about not only our failures, maybe sometimes we can get a laugh out of that, but also having an opportunity to learn so that they aren't recreating the wheel, essentially, right? So that they aren't making the same mistakes that we have, and so that they have an opportunity to use our experiences as a foundation, as kind of like a jumping off point, so that they can do a little better than we did, and we can all learn from each other. That's what the connection is all about. We can all learn from each other. So I think maybe this is a good opportunity for us today to hear from our guest, Reverend Shannon LeMaster-Smith, who has 20 years of experience in ministry and children and youth. And so I think we have an opportunity today to learn from all of the great experiences that she has. And so for some of us, maybe this could be a jumping off point. So Shannon, what's the story behind, all the things that John just shared with us? What's the story behind those 20 years of experience that you've got?
Oh, I have to say, I love the whole epic fail segment. I think that definitely needs to be a thing. I was asked to write a blog about youth ministry, 10 years ago. And the question that they asked was, what is your biggest failure thus far in your ministry? And I loved that, because so many times blogs are all about promoting yourself. And this was an opportunity to share a lesson learned from a time that, maybe you didn't make the best decision. And I mean, it really gets to what a lot of what I'm going to be sharing. So if you wanted me to start, I'm happy to share a failure with you.
Yeah, let's go. Let's kick it off.
Nice. We're going to go. Yes. Mark this. This is our first one.
It just seemed appropriate. I'm not perfect as a recovering perfectionist. I can say that. And I have, my goodness, learned so much from the things that I could have done differently, but I did the best I could at the time with the knowledge that I knew. And but anyway, that particular blog post was about probably still my biggest failure, and it speaks to what the youth need from us now, which is authenticity. We had gotten together with a group of youth ministers in the area and the church that I served to respond to a crisis in the community. We were going to have a prayer service for the youth and the community to gather to give them an opportunity to share about how they were feeling about the crisis in the community. And I was at the time trying to convince a youth to come to this prayer meeting. And I said, "Oh, you should come. It's going to be fun. And it's not going to be too touchy-feely." And he looked at me really oddly and he said, "Well, then what's the point?" And it punched me in the gut, because I was trying to convince him to come to this thing that was not about fun. It was confronting a crisis in the community that was a series of suicides that had been happening. And this kid had lost friends, and I wasn't thinking. And I was trying to, again, convince him to come to this thing rather than really sit with him and listen, which was the whole point. And he reminded me of that. And it has stuck with me to this day that what youth need is authenticity and vulnerability, and for us to sit with them and whatever it is that they're experiencing in life, rather than, what we tend to do, which is say, "Come to my thing." So I learned a lot from that epic fail.
Yeah, I think
that was a great first one. I love that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we think a lot about the fun that youth and young people like to have, and they do, but like, because they haven't experienced some of the things that older folks have experienced, the things that they do, the negatives that they do experience, hit them really hard. And we might look at those things and say, "Oh, well, you're young, wait until you get older, like you'll get more perspective or whatever." But in the time that they're experiencing it, it's huge for them. And
Absolutely.
so I think sometimes we tend to kind of like try to belittle it and that type of thing. And I'm not saying that that's what you were doing, but I think the opportunity to go to this type of prayer meeting to deal with something that was so big, I think for that, I don't want to assume that I know how this young person feels, but I think sometimes we might forget that, those things for them, especially if they've grown up in the church, is a really good opportunity for them to be a part of something like a prayer meeting, so that they can have a space to wrestle with those deep things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what many young people need right now, is a space to wrestle, a safe space to come and ask questions and to be vulnerable, to know that it's okay to be sad, to not be okay, and to know that they are surrounded by a group of adults and peers that love them and care about them, and that they're not alone in whatever the pain is that they're experiencing.
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions that I typically make is that, like, if I'm going to do any youth thing, it's got to be based on fun, Nope. So I'm guilty of misconceptions. What are some other misconceptions that you've heard about in discussing and engaging in youth ministry?
How long do we have? There's so many. I mean, really. I think as we talked about numbers at the beginning, the biggest thing I think is that it's easier to talk about youth than to actually engage them in relationship.
Youth are meant to be seen, not heard. Isn't that the oldest?
Or even, let's just talk about them.
Right.
Where are they? Why aren't they here? So many percentage of young people have left, but yet look around your sanctuary. There might be one. And if there's one, like, how do you think they feel when the narrative is there are no youth? It happened at annual conference this year. In fact, we had youth at annual conference, and they heard some people from the stage say, "We don't have any youth here at annual conference." And they're like, "What about me?" Like, they were there. They cared enough to be there and did not feel seen. And so I think that we really need to do better to open our eyes to who is there and pay attention to them when they show up. And that's half the battle.
You mean they're actually individuals? They're not just lumps of numbers?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. The statistics, the lumps of numbers have contributed to this narrative that objectifies and distances youth from being part of the church community. And so people tend to look at those numbers and declare defeat we can't beat these Saturday tournaments and Sunday softball games. And so essentially what we're doing is judging parents for not bringing their kids, when what we really need to be doing is being curious about the youth's lives and their parents' lives, and be willing to listen to what's going on, and to be willing to adapt to what they need from the larger church community. And what they don't need is our judgment.
Fire.
Absolutely.
Bringing the fire. Love that.
Absolutely. Yeah, you go ahead.
Sorry. One of the other big ones.
We got about an hour here, right? To do
okay, cool. Great. Let me do more. One of the other big ones is that this mindset of the traditional models of youth ministry being youth ministry. Youth ministry is Sunday night youth group, and that's just not the case anymore. And so the fact is, youth ministry is just simply ministry with youth. And so many churches think that they have to hire someone as a youth director, when in reality, it's all about building relationships with the youth themselves. I actually convinced the church to not hire a part-time youth minister, because they're trying to find an outsider to come into their insider-focused community, when I'm like, well, what I would be doing and working with that person is to help them help you find relationship spaces, to build relationships with the youth. And so, I mean, when we consider how to build relationships with people, we can look to Jesus for help with that. Jesus took different approaches to engaging with people. With some people, he preached and taught, but with others, he simply sat with them and listened. With others, he asked some hard questions. And so I think we're really in a season of ministry with youth and families where we need to be more, we need to be doing more listening than talking. More asking questions than passing down judgments. And we need to be spending more time with youth rather than talking about them, or hiring someone to do that work for us. And that is the thing. The hired youth ministry staff does not absolve the rest of us from engaging in relationships with the youth. They are simply there to help facilitate those relationships by creating spaces for those relationships to be formed and nourished.
That's a big reality of naming the staff are not the only people in ministry as part of that. And we know that not just youth directors get treated that way, but any staff of a church get treated sometimes as if they are the only person who is supposed to be doing ministry.
Yeah, and I think that goes to what you were saying earlier about, and what I was saying, that were victims of previous generation success. Everybody had a youth minister, and they had an associate, and they had all this staff, and now they're trying to get it back. And I'm glad that there are people like you out there that are going, whoa, especially in youth, that are like, I know that sounds good, and that sounds exactly like what you should do. And yet, so that's
and I love that idea too.
It's hard to throw off those old things because they worked in their time.
And I love that idea too of making it like it's not necessarily something that needs to happen in the church. Like, if you recognize that you've got youth that are into sports, that are into other things, like find a time to hang out with them that's not the traditional time, just so that you can get to know them better. Of course, with their parents there, right? You're not just like taking youth off by themselves, but
all the things.
But I think youth, like I see it in my kids right now. Like, my kids are looking up to these older youth, right? And I think youth are looking up to adults in a certain way as well. And I think any opportunity that we have to kind of sit and engage in a relationship with them, and just kind of model good, just model the Christian life around them, and give them opportunities to feel safe and to feel like they can ask deep questions, and not to say that we have all the answers, but to make them feel like they don't need to have all the answers, but that they can they can grow with us. So I love that idea. It's as a pastor in a church that's very traditional, sounds kind of radical, like, hey, let's not do a youth director. And so I'm sure some of our listeners are like, wait, what are you saying? No youth director? But
no. Like, we still need people to help us. Let's be clear. I love my youth directors, and my children's directors. I mean, they do fabulous work. But the point in that misconception is that they're not the only ones to do the work. And in fact, statistics show youth and children need at least 5 adults in their life that they can turn to. And so if we put all that to one person, we're setting everybody up for failure, when what we need to be doing is stepping in and just being with youth, showing them that we care. One of our part-time youth ministers is bivocational. She works full-time separately than her youth director position. And so she couldn't go to the youth's games or recitals or plays. And so she involved the United Methodist Men and kind of supporting a pep club to where the United Methodist Men go to the youth games and recitals. And I think that's brilliant. And so you have these, older men going, and they're meeting the parents. They're sitting with the parents, talking with them. And then the women, women in the faith, were like, well, we want to do that too. And so it's just a brilliant way to involve the lay people in supporting our young people.
Wow, who would have thought taking the cheaper option in some places would actually help you? But that shows that it's not about how much you throw at it, or money or or staff or whatever.
I think too, great. Like sometimes the majority of the folks that are in our United Methodist Men's and like our United Methodist Women or United Women in Faith, sometimes a good chunk of those folks are retired, so they have some extra time to do some of these things that the youth need, and you don't have to prepare for that. You just show up and cheer them on. I love that.
Yeah, it's that simple. And the parents, they'll see you because they'll recognize you. And that consistency and showing up to things means a lot, and it helps build trust with them. So then when they see you at church, they recognize you, and even though they may not speak to you, they care, and it means something.
Yeah, they are.
Absolutely.
Well, I have another misconception. Go ahead, Jesse. I have another misconception. I want her to kill.
Okay. Go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things I hear in a lot of meetings are things like parents today are lazy. They don't want to take their kids. / kids are lazy. All they care about today are these. I could see you just like shaking your head off your shoulders. So if you could take a deep breath, and I'm sure that was a lot of frustration. Help us dispel some of these things that we have heard time and time again in so many church meetings.
Where to start?
Grace,
it absolutely breaks my heart.
Yeah.
When church people judge parents, when what we need to be doing is stepping up and helping them. When church people will ask me, where are the parents? Where are the young people? And I'll say, have you reached out to them? Well, no, that's your job. It's not. I mean, it is. And I know. The thing is, like, I knew where my parents were. I knew what they were struggling with because I reached out to them on the regular basis and knew what was going on in their lives. But that's where it's not just up to the staff or the pastor to know those things. We are a community of faith for a reason. We are to care for one another. And that does not mean, again, relegating all of that to the pastors. It means checking on people. And I'm just as guilty as the next person to like be thinking about someone and say a little prayer for them, but not actually reach out to them. So I've learned to cultivate this sense of when I think about somebody, I'll text them and say, hey, just thinking about you. Hey, I'm praying about you. Hey, I saw your post on Facebook about your health issues. Just want to know that I'm thinking about you. And if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. We have to pay attention to what's going on in parents' lives. And a lot of them post on Facebook. So it's not hard to know, to know about.
I just laugh at how easy it would be for some of these people to figure out how hard it is. Yeah. All they would have to do is read it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so many of them are sharing their struggles publicly Why? Obviously, because they want somebody to reach out to them and say, "Hey, I see you, and I'm with you in this," or like, "I didn't know how hard things were." And so it's easy just for us to stay in our bubble of judgment when, like, let's pop that and go see and check in on people and care about them and truly live into Christian community, by praying for one another and checking with one another. Maybe somebody loves to cook and they can take a family of a meal. Like, I mean, if you see that they're struggling or just busy or going through a lot, checking in with them to see how you can help support them.
So you're saying we hear these things and we should respond with care?
Yeah.
Instead of, whatever it is we.
Yeah. I can't even imagine being a parent today and all of the demands. But mostly what I hear are not just the demands, but the judgments. It is a heavy burden as a parent to not only have to do all of the things that they do, but to then carry all the judgments for all the things that they don't have the capacity for. Like, so then you have just parents who are feeling like failures nonstop because they can't measure up to what they think they're supposed to do. So then, of course, they're not going to come to church where all that judgment is like a big old cake, a layer cake of just immediate. They walk into the space and not feel good enough. That's not what the church is about, y'all. It's about grace. Like, we as United Methodists have this gift to give to the world, and that is grace upon grace upon grace.
You made me cry, Shane. But it's the stain on the pew cushion problem, right? It's somebody comes up to you after church as a pastor and they go, you can't let the young people those kids bring their hot chocolate, back to their seats. If we get stains on those, how are we going to take those stains out? And I'm thinking, if God blesses you with stains on your cushions that a child gave it,
take them.
Just thank God.
Yeah.
Just
thank God. God.
But I just love that. I love turning. I mean, not just. And it's so Christian, turning completely around. It's repentance. Ooh, yeah. I mean, it's right. It's that not blame. Go completely the other way and ask, how can I help?
Yeah.
So sorry you haven't been in church for the. What can we do? Do you need anything? Instead of noticed you weren't in church on Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I love essentially what I'm hearing that you say is that it's not just the job of church staff, but it's like we're all a priesthood of believers. And so we should all be ministering to our youth through like relational engagement with them. And I think that's from what I'm hearing so far, I think that's one of the most important parts of our conversations today. Like the incredible potential for joy, for renewal and growth when young people are truly embraced by the church, not just their youth director, but by the church.
Yes, absolutely.
So why is the burden of renewal and growth and even joy placed at the feet of our youth? Like, why are we burdening them with this and maybe burdening our youth directors, but why is it not the burden of the entire church?
So, to be honest, when I first started out in ministry, I resisted the title of youth minister for a long time. I was trained as a Christian education director, and that was a big difference to me. It was in lots of ways. But my youth would call me their youth minister. They claimed me before I was ready to accept it.
Amen. Ooh. Amen.
And what I learned from them, which if you ever work with youth, you're going to learn some things,
oh, heavens.
Is that they have so much potential to affect the room around them, but not just the room around them, but the world. They have so much energy and are willing to try new things. They don't need things to be absolutely perfect before they try something. I lived half of my life in that realm. They're willing to experiment and they just have this sense of awe and wonder about them.
When they feel safe, right?
Yeah, they ask really good questions because they're trying to make sense of the world around them. And so that's exactly why we need to value their perspective and include them in leadership and the whole life of the church. one of the things I learned, especially at my last church, but also at every one of our conference, council, and youth ministry meetings, is that the youth are incredibly good problem solvers. I am in awe of how they are able to find solutions that I did not think of, because I'm kind of smart, and it's taken me a long time to have the confidence to say that, but I know what I'm doing. But sometimes in the past couple of years, I've hit a wall and not known what to do, and it's been a youth that has shown me a different way that I did not consider before that.
Not in boxes.
Yeah. Well, I was never given a box either, but with life experience, us often
create our own, don't we?
As adults, we shut down possible solutions in our heads, but youth don't have that same sense of confinement, so they just have a larger canvas of possibilities to explore.
Faith of the child.
So I mean, it's amazing. Like even just with our conference youth event, Ignite Us, we were at capacity last year, and we considered all these possible solutions. In my mind was like, well, do we cap the number of people who can come? Do we cap the ratio of adults to youth? Do we say churches can't bring any more than a certain amount of people? I had never considered what they ended up pitching and deciding, which was, let's have 2 weekends.
Oh, love it.
I'm like, what? Not just so these young people who are already just overcommitted, but care so much, they already have committed to planning and leading this youth event themselves. Like, we don't bring in a speaker; they creatively proclaim the word at all of our worship sessions themselves.
Co-creators.
Yeah. And so not only that, but then they're willing to give not 1 but 2 weekends in the spring to serve. Wow. And their response to my awe and questioning of that is, well, we can reach more youth that way.
Oh.
And I'm like, wow, I'm just in awe of them. And they get joy because it's valuable for them to be in leadership. They learn from leading. And so that's where the joy comes from. And then it's contagious.
I think and I this is a little bit broad, but in a lot of places, we took youth out of all the decision-making process. And we didn't,
all kinds of excuses, right? Because they're not ready. They can't
everyone.
handle it. Well, chances are they have handled a lot more than you thought.
100%. That's right. And so we've taken them out of being co-creators when we know that's the first story, right? Yeah. Is God bringing us in as co-creators? Therefore, we have buy-in. We're a part of it. And now that I love that idea of bringing the youth back into co-creating the church, so that maybe when they grow up, they're invested.
Absolutely.
So that brings us to the next question of looking at practical ways to engage youth as in the life of the church or in the church or whatever language you want to look at. And we've talked about some of these things that people have said they're tried or have ideas about, whether it's creating things like youth-led worship services, doing mentorship programs with older and younger people in the congregation, encouraging youth to be involved in leadership in the church, in councils or in worship or wherever that is, or leveraging social media and technology to connect with them on platforms they're already using. So the question we've got for Shannon is, in today's world, are these helpful things?
I wish that I could say, yes, you have the answer. Everybody go do this bullet point of things. It'll work for you in every context. We're done. We're always looking for that quick fix, right? Or the one-size-fits-all approach. But the truth is that every context is different. What works in some places would never work in others. So going back to what I said at the beginning, it's all about having conversations with your youth and the families to gain a deeper understanding of what they're interested in, when is good for them. We have to stop the whole idea of come to my event that I planned when it's convenient for me to host the event approach, and start having conversations with people to understand what their needs and desires are. And be willing to adapt to those. So for some churches, the traditional Sunday evening youth group still works. That's fine. For many, it does not. Some have gone to once a month meetings instead of meeting every week. And that as a way of kind of rebuilding momentum, and that seems to work. You might have 2 or 3 that show up if you have it every week, but then you have 15 that show up once a month, and it's a lot more enjoyable. For others, their primary youth ministry happens on a Thursday morning prayer breakfast before school. We have monthly meetups of youth ministers across the conference. We have 3 regions, a triad region, a metro region, and a mountain region. And we meet monthly to share a meal together and share what's working for them and their contexts, so we can learn from one another. And just this past month, one of our youth ministers said, I don't have many youth come to Sunday nights, but I have many youth that come on Thursday mornings before school, and they'll tell me all kinds of things about their lives. And that's where the magic happens for that particular youth group.
And that's so strange. And I think people need to hear that. Young people were more willing to meet early.
No, young people.
I know, no, but just say, because for everybody listening that says, oh, young people will never, none of them will ever come out in the morning. Stop thinking that way.
Exactly. Like, ask them, like, see what works. And you'd be surprised. You're going to be surprised. For others, it's a Wednesday after school ministry. My primary children's ministry for the past 2 churches I served did not happen on Sunday mornings. They were not going to come to church on Sunday mornings, but they would come on Wednesday afternoons, and we had worship and prayer and learning and fellowship and all the things that you think of as aspects of church. Actually, one of the churches called it Wednesday church, and that's what it was. For others, it's a Monday night small group meeting. And so again, like the time, there's no one size fits all approach. It's really about finding out what works for them and be willing to adapt to that. And so how you do that is to involve the youth in creating and leading the ministry together. And so again, for some, this may mean a traditional youth council type. Again, in our monthly meetups, people are like, well, how does your youth council run? And well, how does yours run? Well, that's interesting. I didn't think about that before. For some, it's still a traditional youth council model. But for others, like at my past 2 churches, it was like taking youth out to ice cream and having informal conversations about what they'd like to see. Or I would kind of be silly about it and have a business meeting before the lesson part of our youth group to say, okay, like, and just float ideas by them to see what things they were interested in. But to be clear about all of this, and this is, I guess, combating another misconception, this is not a one-time thing. Youth ministry takes time. Because they may not trust you right away. And so you can't just expect everything to happen if you do this once. It's going to take time. We're playing the long game. So
or don't quit if it doesn't work.
Right. So don't quit if it doesn't work. But be willing to consider why it didn't work, and even ask the youth, like, why is this not working? Can you help me in figuring this out? And so the other thing with that is you have to follow through. I've heard from youth and parents in places where they were like, oh yeah, like so-and-so asked for our opinion, but then they would do the opposite of what we told them we wanted or needed.
And the kids see that.
Yeah, absolutely.
They learn fast.
Yeah, they lose trust. So you have to follow through. If you're going to ask them for their input, actually follow through with it. But by consistently showing up, I remember in my youth Sunday school class when I was a youth, I was often the only one that showed up. And this guy named Brian showed up every week to teach youth Sunday school, even though it was sometimes just me. And that meant a lot to me. I wish I could tell him, hey, Brian, if you're listening, like, thank you for being there for me. Even though I was often the only one there, it meant a lot to me that you showed up. And so for all of you out there who work with youth, when you have one person, don't worry about the people who aren't there. Just be there for that one person. It makes a difference.
I think sometimes we get so worried about like not having everyone that we want. Like we have vision, and I think that's great to have vision, but I think and maybe it's because the world we live in of instant gratification, like you want something from Amazon, you'll probably get it tomorrow. I think we get so worried that folks like, oh, I only have one volunteer. I think A, that gives you an opportunity to get really creative with having just one volunteer. And I think B, it gives you an opportunity to like recognize the stage that you're in and make the best of the stage that you're in, and not worry that you're not like on stage 4. Like stage 4 is coming, right? We serve a God of abundance. So stage 4 is coming, right? We'll just trust God to send those folks. But right now we're not in stage 4, and that's okay. Every church is not going to be Elevation. Stop thinking that you need to be Hillsong level before you can move forward. Like, it's just be where you are in the moment and celebrate the gifts of the moment. That's my soapbox for today. Jonathan, you might have something else that you want to ask.
Okay. One of the things, like as Shannon was saying, it's about building trust and respect with the people. And that's not just youth today. People, we don't have an innate trust of the church or of any organization right now. So we have to do the work of building that trust and those relationships and that mutual respect in order for ministry to progress. We don't live in the world, as we keep talking about, that people just show up for stuff because the church is having it anymore as part of that. So that's one of the big things. But I wanted to step to something on the conference level. We've talked about this a couple times before, but and as Shannon mentioned earlier, some of the youth were obviously bothered that people were saying there were no youth at annual conference.
I'm so glad they were bothered.
Yeah, so glad they were
that
bothered.
Bothered them and they did something.
Yes, so they happened to be know who I was, because if you haven't figured out, listeners, that Shannon and I are married to each other. We have the same last name.
Breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. It's out there.
They reached out to me and said, hey, how can we make it where we're visible? We're on stuff. We're part of this. I said, well, we can work to change the rules. And our planet.
I just need to pause there. You instead of what they have heard our whole life was, oh, maybe we'll talk about it. Or maybe you went, well, let's change the rules. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I had to pause there. That was a moment.
Yeah. I mean, that's that reality of we can do something now and figure it out as we build it. I mean, and we stayed up late that night. The youth and I stayed up late that night wordsmithing that. We sent it, and over the course of that day, it was stressful. It was hot, but I met with the bishop, with several other youth, several other people on the Plan of Organization and Rules Committee, with the conference secretary, Kim. And we talked about it and got it worked out to where it would not bind the annual conference to certain things, but we said, when at all possible and allowed, there shall be a youth on every conference entity, committee, council, whatever that is, unless the Book of Discipline says no, or the connectional table, which is our sort of in-between annual conference decision-making body, says maybe there should not be a youth on that.
Those reasons are usually what? Just for people's...
for trustees, they can't be on it because you have to be over 18 in the U.S. to be on trustees. A couple others are like the Board of Ordained Ministry meets for essentially 2 weeks straight during the day. There's no real way they could do the Board of Ordained Ministry work not having full days like that, because it's a lot of work to do on their behalf. But others, it's just about changing up meeting times, thinking differently about how we do our work. How can we do this via email or chat? Or how can we do this, instead of meeting every month all day on a Tuesday, why don't we meet twice a month over Zoom on Tuesday evenings? As part of that, figuring out how to do that work. I mean, it's going to be complicated. What I did not expect when we got all that rule changed and passed was that local pastors who were part-time reached out to me and said, thank you. This also means they have to take into consideration my schedule when they plan these things, because people who are bivocational often have a 9 to 5, and then they're doing church work at night on the weekends, those sort of things, and are having to balance that life. And to be asked to be on a conference committee and then expected to be at a 10 a.m. on a Thursday meeting, it's hard. And that's a reality of all that. But so back to youth, which, when the youth work to change things, it benefits everybody, is what I'm trying to say. As part of that, it also benefits the way we need to think about how we are training leaders as part of this, because one of the things we put in place is that each committee would have a mentor who would work with that youth to make sure that they knew what was going on and to make sure that they felt comfortable speaking and engaging and providing input.
I didn't know that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I wrote a job description for the mentors, and I drafted it, but I also took it to our conference council and youth ministry and asked them, what do you need from a mentor in order to feel successful and included as part of this? So the youth got to help me draft the job description for the mentors, which I think is
creators. Cool. Bring them back in.
And some of the questions we got, well, do youth really want to be on this committee or that committee? And yet we have somebody who put on their application, Council of Finance and Administration. 3 times.
And if one's willing to do that, they'll do anything.
Because I love this kid. And but on his application, you can put your top 3 choices. And his top 3 choices, every single one of them, he put Council on Finance Administration. Council on Finance Administration. I'm like, good for you, buddy. You know what you want.
Dig into that. So that's that reality of saying, hey, youth want to serve even on the weird committees that I don't want to serve on.
Yeah, they want to be heard.
Yeah. Now I'm looking forward to getting a youth on organization and rules. Hopefully someone has signed up interested in that as part of that.
Are you going to be their mentor?
We shall see. We have other people on that committee. They're lovely as well.
Okay, so I'm not going to lie, though. That's going to have to be one of the ones you make fun somehow. Organization and rules. Come on.
When you have a mindset of we can change the rules,
exactly,
it opens up everything, right?
Maybe that's the fun part. That's the fun part. I like it.
I think y'all did that. I mean, I say y'all, but the youth kind of did it themselves. I mean, y'all played. Sorry, I'm going to say this. I'm going to ego boost y'all, but y'all, I think, were the perfect grown-ups in the room for this. You heard them, and you were like, let's figure out how to do something about this. Let's not just say, oh, that's nice. Or, oh, sure, you feel that way and that's fine. You went, let's figure this out. And at each step you were like, is this right? How are you feeling? How's this wording? And so just take that as and sometimes we hear those stories and we're like, oh yeah, but what happened? We changed fundamentally the church and our conference. By having
I think that's a powerful thing. And stepping back even further, looking at General Conference back in May, there was in fact they had to make a judicial council ruling because some of the committees for the general agencies have to have youth on them, but there were no youth in the body of General Conference because we had taken so long to get from election to actual General Conference that they moved from, being a lovely 10th or 11th grader to being a 22-year-old as part of that. So essentially, we had to send it to the Judicial Council to say, do we actually have to find a youth if no youth is present in the body of General Conference? And it came back essentially yes. And they got heated on the floor of saying, the bishop who was presiding saying, no, we don't need to do this. Since there's no one here, we can't do it. And eventually the people said, no, we need to go find youth. And they sent the Division on Young People to find youth who would be willing to serve on various conference commissions and councils. General agencies is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah,
so
it has a profound effect. It changes the nature of rules that get passed, even if they end up getting passed. Sometimes just having that youth on there takes out that one sentence, that was going to hold the church back for a decade. But you know what? That 17-year-old was like, I see. This sentence is going to be a problem.
So now the thing we're going to have to do as the adults who want this is to train the adults who aren't sure how to handle it. No, we need to listen to them. They are not here as a place filler. They're here with voice equal and vote equal to you as part of this. So we have to tell them, listen to them. If not, provide equity and empower them as they are someone who needs their voice to be given even more emphasis than yours.
Oh, yeah. And I think, it's forcing the issue, I think, of hearing their voices is what was done. And that's I think that means a lot to them to go, you mean there weren't any youth and they didn't just go, oh, well, next time. You mean they actually stopped? They stopped their whole conference because they believe that if they don't have a youth voice in there, that they will go down the wrong road.
Yeah.
And so we waited.
We had cheers. I loved it.
We sure did.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
The cheers were great.
And they heard that. They felt that. I mean, the youth that were there were like, wow.
Yeah,
it was a cool moment.
And I think too, for some folks, they recognize that this is going to mean a lot of extra work, but they also recognize that it's important work, not just important to the youth, but important.
Shannon, this is hard. I think maybe we should
absolutely.
So we're talking about all these things in the past and how we failed, and in the present how we failed, and how in the future we're going to do better. But I think if I might speak for you, Shannon, this is hard. And that's that's not bad.
Right. Like thinking about sermon prep, or teaching a class, it's much easier to just talk the whole time, right?
Oh yeah,
it's a lot harder to creatively proclaim a message, to involve, songs or movement or visuals or an activity. It takes up more time, and it involves thinking beyond just what you can say from your mouth. And so it's the same with youth leadership development. But the hardest thing, I'll have to say, is letting go of control and how you think things need to be, and letting go of how, like, as a, again, recovering perfectionist and an Enneagram 1, the youth have taught me, I have learned from them to let go of how I think something needs to be. And when I do that, like, it's amazing. They actually have better ideas than me sometimes. And like, I'm kind of offended. No, I'm happy for that. It's a good thing. And I mean, well, that speaks a lot to ego, right? We think we know it all as adults. We think we have all the right answers and that our way is the right way. But if we are truly about inclusion, if we are truly open to young people, or people who look and think and talk differently than us, then we need to let go and think for, just a moment, and that will open up more. What if their ideas are just as good or better than mine? What if we humble ourselves and think, maybe I don't know it all? And so when we let go of all of that, the Holy Spirit can really work. And
it is so hard for so many adults with children, is to let go of that I know better than you.
Yeah.
That's so hard to let go.
Well, and sometimes it's not even just a knowing a better or worse. I think it's just a different perspective. And I think sometimes we just need someone who's thought about this from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And then, like, have a combination of our perspectives create something new together. And I think, like we were talking about earlier, we're allowing them to be co-creators with us in the same way that God allowed us to be co-creators with God. If God is setting that example and saying, I know literally everything, and I have enough power. I have enough power to do literally anything, but I'm going to allow you, small puny human, to be a part of my plans. Why would we ever believe that we were too good to have youth be a part of our plans and a part of our work?
Amen.
I love it.
Amen.
Love this conversation. You probably noticed me doing a lot of typing while we were talking. And some of our guests might have heard my super loud keyboard clacking away over here, but that's just because I'm so inspired that I'm like taking notes about my personal ministry and all that. So I'm really hoping.
Jesse, are you going to do the closing?
I wasn't, but we can. Yeah,
go ahead. Do that.
You let me know. What do you want to do?
I was going to do the dream question. I was going to do the bishops.
Do it.
You want to do it? All right. So at General Conference, right, we saw some seismic shifts in the denomination. And one of the things that the bishop said after General Conference was, for ordination and who belongs in the church and who belongs in leadership in the church, we've shifted our thinking from a Timothy perspective, maybe understanding of that, to a Pentecost understanding of that, where your young men and women will dream dreams. You're old. It's a fully inclusive, everybody's going to be doing this together. And that you will dream dreams. So I always, when I have somebody under 18, eventually I'm going to say that you get to do prophesy, because it's the young women that gets to prophesy. So anybody over 18's got a dream. All right. So dream, Shannon, dream with me. 50 years from now, you're looking back, you've written books about youth ministry, and what does brand new youth ministry in your mind look like 50 years from now? Dream.
I think it's when we are no longer confined to a room, or a basement, or these spaces that we've somewhat discarded and said, oh yeah, the youth can meet there. It's when the churches and the community don't just keep to themselves, but get outside the church walls. It's a movement where youth lead us into new ways of thinking and being, that youth youth are already doing this. They're going to their friends' youth groups. They don't see church as just this one worship service on a Sunday. It's this larger movement of the Holy Spirit. And so I think that that's where the youth ministry will lead us. There's cooperative youth ministries already bubbling up, where there are 5 churches coming together to form a youth group because they can't otherwise have the ability to exist on their individually. But I think that's the Holy Spirit saying that we're not meant to exist individually. We're meant to come together and to expand our influence, especially as United Methodists, as people of grace. The world needs more of that. We need more grace for ourselves and for one another. And it's just a real gift that we as United Methodists can give to the world. And so I think the more we teach that with our youth, the more they can guide us in experiencing that together. It'll break down walls, and we will be people without walls who just extend grace everywhere.
Love it. Absolutely. So thank you so much. Like I said, always giving me so many great notes to take, inspiring me, allowing me to dream dreams as well. So thank you so much. And I hope that this is not the only time that we have you on the podcast. We've covered a whole lot today, but I think the central message of everything that we've covered is clear. I mean, it's giving us an opportunity to continue to be the church. If the church wants to thrive, we need to invest in young people. We need to listen, to engage, to empower them, not just as the future of the church, but as the present of the church, and allow them to be a part of the present of the church and shaping that as well. And yes, sometimes that means giving a bit of our own power, and that's fine. We serve a God who has shared God's power with us. So here's our call.
Practice.
Exactly. Good spiritual practice of letting go and letting God do what only God can do. You know, sometimes we act like that we do any of this on our own power. It's not our own power. It's God's power. So here's our call to action for you, for our listeners today. How are you engaging with the youth in your congregation? And it doesn't have to be structured every time, but how are you engaging? What steps can you take today to make space for their voices? We'd love to hear your stories and ideas. So we encourage you to reach out to us on social media or through our website. And if you see any of us, Shannon included, on socials, give us an opportunity to say hi. But that wraps up today's episode of the Means of Grace podcast. Join us next time for what I'm sure will be another riveting conversation. But until then, keep seeking, keep growing, and remember, the future of the church is in our hands. God has blessed us with an opportunity to shape it, but it's also in the hands of our youth, because God is blessing them just the same. We are all in this together. We'll join you next time.